This is Tim Graham, KNEA Director of Government Relations, and you are listening to our Week 7 Under the Dome podcast. This week, I've invited a longtime personal friend and mentor, former Senator Anthony Hensley, State Senator of Kansas. Anthony, we've been through a lot together, haven't we?
That's an understatement.
It is an understatement. Well, first of all, I worked for you from August of 2000 until the last day of December of 2016, with the caveat of, for 1 year, you guys made me go over and be the Assistant Secretary of State.
I didn't make you do that.
Well, the good thing is that you guaranteed me a place to come back should we not win that election.
I did do that,
and
yes.
And that was greatly appreciated from me and my family.
Something can be said for being, in a legislative staff position for almost 16 years. That's very rare. Most staff people don't stay around for maybe 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. And I've always wondered what that means about me. Am I a little bit crazy or just not smart enough to do something else? But no, I enjoyed it. You were, we were kind of two peas in a pod. My dad likes to talk about how, he brings up the good old days of our legislative camaraderie a lot of times about, hey, you and Anthony, you guys really took that person on. He'll mention somebody and say, you guys really had that guy wrapped up, or you guys really took him on. He talks about a lot, and my parents are great admirers of you for how you kind of helped me grow up through my career. I was 24 years old when I was 26 years old when I started. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is now I'm older, much older than you were when I started for you. I remember we had a fundraiser we tried to raise $50K for your 50th.
Yeah.
Now I'm 50 years old. Yeah. Or I'm 51 now.
Yeah.
So
it's hard to believe.
Your daughter, Katie, was probably in grade school. She's now tell us.
Well, my daughter is an elementary school principal at Tecumseh North Elementary School in the Shawnee Heights School District, which is out in the eastern part of Shawnee County. She worked for USD 501 for a number of years and wanted the principal's job at Ross Elementary in 501, but didn't get that. And so she told me, she said, I think I'm going to apply out at Shawnee Heights. And fortunately, she was able to get the Tecumseh North job.
That's great.
Tecumseh North is, you might say, the lower income elementary school within Shawnee Heights.
Okay.
They get a lot of the kids from the Eastgate subdivision. So it's a very multicultural school, which is really what she had at Ross. And that's what she wanted to continue to do, is to work with, underprivileged kids.
Yeah. Well, she's uniquely qualified, basically growing up in your household. And we'll talk about your parents here in a little bit, because the whole public service aspect of the Hensleys goes back a few generations when everybody knows it. But, one of the fun things about working for you, at least from my perspective, is that you're a great storyteller, right? And you've told stories so many times that I feel like I was there back in the 70s and the 80s when I was just a kid. I feel like I was there working for you all those years ago, because you do such a great job of telling those stories. And one of the stories you would tell a lot of people in your introductions several years ago was that there were 3 phases of your life that kind of started at the same time. You were elected to the Kansas legislature. You married your wife, Deborah, and you started coaching Little League Baseball all about the same time.
Yeah, that would have been in the late 1970s. I first got elected to the legislature in 1976. I actually ran against an incumbent in the Democratic Party and won that election. And at that time, when I started teaching, I joined the Kansas National Education Association. And what was interesting about that first election is that the guy I was running against was the friendly incumbent as far as KNEA was concerned. So I didn't even have KNEA's endorsement, even though I was a card-carrying member of the Kansas NEA. And I'll never forget the night of the primary election.
Who was the most surprised?
My mother.
I knew that.
My mother was the most surprised, and she kept saying, "I can't believe you won. I can't believe you won." And I said, "Well, get over it. I won." So when the TV station, WIBW in Topeka, announced my having won the election, the phone rang, and it was a representative from KNEA to explain to me that I was going to be their endorsed candidate in the general election. That literally was the very first phone call I got.
Who was that? Do you remember?
A guy named Stan Seidel.
Stan Seidel.
Yeah, who later got into the 501 administration. I think he became an assistant principal.
He went to management, huh?
Yeah, he went to management. But, and then the following fall, in 1977, I got married. My wife, who next year in 2027 it'll be 50 years that we've been married. It's hard to believe that.
Yeah.
And in 1978, which would have been my second session, a friend of mine who was my state senator at the time, a guy named Jim Parrish, convinced me to take on a ragtag bunch of 10-year-old little leaguers to coach Little League baseball, and I did that for, I don't know, over 30 years.
Yeah. And even after you left the Diamond, per se, you still were active in making sure they had sponsorship.
Yeah, I still am.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
You still, okay. Yeah. And you were active in the Highland Park Baseball Association.
Baseball Association.
I remember several times back when you were still coaching over lunchtime, we'd go eat lunch somewhere, which is another thing that is pretty synonymous with working for Hensley. You eat well, but then we'd always, if it was summertime, we'd swing by the ballpark, particularly if it rained, to see if we were going to be able to. You guys are going to be able to play.
Yeah.
And you had some pretty good players over the years. You've had several of them that have gone on to do some pretty cool things.
I always refer to those guys as my summer sons because my wife and I have the one daughter. But, I've had several guys that have actually made the major leagues. They didn't last very long, but they were in, farm system. I had one of my players, John Dean, who was an all-state basketball player at Topeka High. He was affiliated with the Atlanta Braves Association, or Major League team. Dylan Hazlett, who went on to play minor league baseball. Brett Ash, who went to Washburn University, also went and played minor league baseball. So I've had some good players over the years and thoroughly enjoyed all the times I was out there on the field.
Yeah.
I always thought it was kind of mental therapy to go out and not have to worry about things in the legislature or in the classroom, whatever the case may be, and just enjoy myself coaching baseball.
Well, and I got to go out and watch several of those games too, and your players, they really liked you. They respected you, and you could tell that you were a player's coach. And I've heard so many of those stories too, many of them which we aren't going to get into today, but there's been some really funny stories about the baseball diamond being around those kids. And they were anywhere from the age of 10 to 18?
Well, that group of 10-year-olds I had initially in 1978, I took clear up until they were 18.
Okay. Yeah.
They aged out. And then I went back down to the 14 and under level. I wasn't going to go back down to coaching 10-year-olds, but went down to the 14 and under level and took those guys up to when they were 18. And then for the last several years, I got stuck at the 18 and under level.
Yeah. Yeah. I did. And there's, like I said before, you've had some great stories and just shown or you've said them so many times that I feel like I was in the dugout with you. Those stories, and of course my dad was a longtime coach as well, but having you as my mentor and my dad as a coach, it made a lot of sense for me to really want to start coaching.
One of the stories that I'll never forget.
Be careful. This isn't about the son of any high-ranking judges or anything.
I won't tell that story, but you're talking about
don't say.
Supreme Court Justice Don Allegrucci's son, but I won't talk about him.
He was a heck of a baseball player, though,
He
right?
was. He was great. But I'm sitting in the dugout at Dornwood Park, and Mr. Lopez, Benny's dad, comes up behind me in the dugout, and he said, "Hey, Coach."
Is this the Charlie Laird story?
He says, hey, Coach, he said, who's the Speaker of the House?
Oh, yeah, I remember this story, too.
And I thought, man, that's a strange question to be asking a guy out at the ballpark. And then I realized he was going to take his naturalization test to becoming a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
And I said, you're taking your test, aren't you? And he said, yeah. I said, well, the Speaker of the House at that time was Tom Foley from Washington State.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, okay, thanks, Coach. So I like to tell that story, particularly in the context of what's going on in this country today.
Yeah.
You know.
And in that context, he was just a dad.
Yeah.
His son was playing Little League Baseball like all the rest of, as American as it gets, right?
Yeah, he worked at Reese's. I'm sure he's retired now, but worked at Reese's, which is a meat processing or a food processing plant that's out on the east side of town.
Yeah. Well, so we're just going to, I've got some notes here to try to keep us on course, but I'm thinking of a story that involves both a Speaker of the House and KNEA and Topeka and you. Do you know what I'm talking about? A famous steak place?
Oh, yeah.
The North Star. You tell us about the time.
Actually, I was invited, and NEA was involved in that because a good friend of mine, Craig Grant, who was the lobbyist for NEA at the time, we were guests.
Let me put a pause first. So this is another story that I've heard so many times that I feel like I was there. There's a picture that still exists that surfaces every once in a while of this event. What it was is it was an event with former Speaker of the House,
Tip O'Neill.
Tip O'Neill. All politics are local, Tip O'Neill. And there's still a steak named after him out there, isn't there?
I believe there is.
Yeah, the big. Tell us about
Porterhouse.
it. Yeah, is it Porterhouse?
It's Porterhouse steak. We were invited out there. Craig Grant and I were there in, it was a fundraiser for then Congressman Jim Slattery.
Oh, yeah.
And O'Neill was kind of on what you'd call his farewell tour. And we had the whole place to ourselves because it was a fundraiser. Might have even been like on a Monday night. The restaurants normally closed on Monday night, but they opened this up purposely for the Slattery fundraiser. And I just recall how wonderful the evening was, and I think O'Neill himself had that porterhouse.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's why they named it the Tip O'Neill Porterhouse.
That was that like a 30 ounce or?
Oh, it was a big steak.
He's a pretty big guy.
Oh, he was a real big guy.
So and you're not. You're a smaller guy. So I mean, the picture of you two next to each other. He's obviously telling a story.
Yeah, he told a lot of stories that night.
Do you remember any of them?
Well, one
that we can talk about.
Well, one I remember in particular was a story he told about a guy that he knew that was always able to get himself invited to different events.
We know a lot of those people, don't we?
And in this one particular instance, this guy was invited, and he was on the platform at John F. Kennedy's inaugural.
Oh, wow.
And O'Neill just didn't believe how this guy was able to finagle himself into being invited.
Do you remember who that guy was?
No.
He didn't identify?
No, well, he told the guy's name.
It's just not a household name.
No, I can't remember.
Yeah. I wonder how many people even would know the name Tip O'Neill nowadays.
Probably not very many.
Yeah. Do you, Mackenzie?
Oh,
No.
He was
I'm from Nebraska too, so like.
Well, but
I got that whole education going behind me.
Well, Tip O'Neill was actually elected to John F. Kennedy's House district.
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives from the Boston area.
1946.
Right after World War II. And he served 3 terms. And then after those 3 terms, O'Neill, who had been, I think, Speaker of the Massachusetts House of Representatives, then took Kennedy's place in Congress and was in Congress for a long, long time. Yeah.
Well, so since we brought up Craig, Craig was a special guy. Craig is one of my predecessors here at Government Relations. He was the first face of KNEA in my career. That he was the first person that I knew of at KNEA.
The first lobbyist of KNEA that I knew was Bob Wooten. And Bob was really kind of the pioneer when it came to political action. He was very instrumental. In fact, I think he may have created the KPAC, which was the first political action committee in Kansas. Yeah. And back when Wooten was there, it was called the Kansas State Teachers Association.
Okay.
And then they changed their name in the late 70s to join in with the National Education Association. Hence, it's the KNEA. And then Craig took Wooten's place. After Wooten retired from KNEA, Wooten ended up going to work for John Carlin when he was governor. And then Craig was lobbyist at KNEA for, at least a couple of decades. Great guy, great advocate for public schools and public school teachers. And then eventually came and worked for me.
Yeah.
When I was in the Senate.
He was our comms director.
Yeah, communications director.
And he came on right after he retired from KNEA. And we were kind of surprised that he wanted to do this, but it was great because at that time we needed a comms director.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering everything right, our comms director at the time, now I'm getting it all mixed up, I think. We needed a comms director. I do remember that.
Right.
I think it must have been 08. For a minute there, I was thinking 04, but it would have been 08.
That sounds right.
Would that have been when Gavin left, or would that have been when Ashley left? I don't quite remember, but we he came in and we're like, "You're hired." He's like, "Yeah, we'd love to have you."
Yeah.
And he came on right before we did an election, which was going to be.
Well, and he helped us with candidate recruitment too.
Yeah. And then he worked for us a couple years, and then he went back into retirement. And then he came back to work for Paul Davis,
right,
over in the House side. So
right.
Craig could not give up politics. He was a passionate
he really was
advocate for education, and then
he was a great Democrat too.
He was, yeah, and he was great at training people and going door to door. I remember his door to door presentation. Every time we did training, we had him come and give that up. So. Well, tell us, let's talk a little bit more about your teaching career first. Obviously, well, I tell you what, let's go to the story about El Dorado and why joining the KNEA became probably one of the most valuable and important decisions you made in your entire career.
Well, I graduated from Washburn University in 1975, and I was looking for a teaching job. And my dad helped me out, and a guy at Washburn named Marion McDonald helped get me a teaching job at El Dorado, USD 490. So that was my first teaching job. And it was I was very fortunate as a first-year teacher to have 5 hours of the same preparation. I taught American civics, and for teachers who understand what I'm talking about, it was a lot more convenient to be able just to teach out of the same textbook and to teach the same thing for 5 hours.
Sure.
And so I had this teaching job. I rented an apartment from an old man named George Tate. I was up, the apartment was up above
his garage, right?
Above his garage. And it was a couple blocks from the school, so I could walk to school, the junior high. I had ninth graders. And then after that school year, I made some really good friends down there. After that school year, when I came home that summer, the summer of 1976.
And how old were you? I mean, you were 21, 22?
22.
Yeah, you're still single.
Yeah. 22 years old. I came back home, and my dad and I had a discussion because we decided one of us was going to run for the Kansas House of Representatives. I lived in the 58th District in the eastern part of Topeka, lived in a neighborhood of Topeka called Highland Park. And we basically decided that I'd make a run for the legislature. And I'll never forget.
And again, 1976.
1976.
Yeah.
I'll never forget sitting at the dining room table there with my dad's mother, Grandma Hulda, making out 3x5 index cards of the voters, the Democratic voters in the 58th District. And I didn't even know I could go to the election commissioner's office and get a printout because I didn't even know what a printout was.
Right.
So I filed for office on the last day, which I think was on the 20th of June.
Oh, wow.
Filing deadline was later, and immediately went out and started knocking on doors. And that summer of 76 was really hot. I mean, I'd walk door to door, and it'd be 105 degrees in the shade. And I met my opponent on the campaign trail one time. I was over on a street in Highland Park called Pennsylvania, and I was walking, knocking on doors, and he came by riding a bicycle. And he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "You're Hensley, aren't you?" Yeah. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, good luck to you."
He didn't think he had any trouble.
No, he didn't.
He underestimated.
Yeah, he underestimated me.
What was? I can't. I'm drawing a blank. I know his name, but I'm drawing a blank.
Marshall, Ken Marshall.
Ken Marshall, yeah. There's a bridge named after him over in, yeah.
And so, like I say, I won. And so after the election, that was in August, I drove back down to El Dorado, and I went to the junior high and talked to my principal, a guy named Larry Parsons, rest in peace. And I said, "Well, I've won this election." He said, "Yeah, congratulations." And I said, "I've got the general election coming up here in Topeka, so I'm going to have to resign my teaching position here in El Dorado." And so he said, "Okay." He said, "Go over to the board building and talk to the superintendent, who is a guy a year or two from retirement named Gerald Franklin." And so I went in and I explained to him that I had to resign my teaching position because I had won the primary up in Topeka. And he said, "Okay, no problem." He said, "You're a social studies teacher, and we can hire, there's all kinds of need for social study teachers, so we won't have any problem finding a replacement." So I resigned. I went to the teacher's lounge and typed up my resignation letter and signed it and gave it to Mr. Franklin and left, went back to Topeka. So during the fall campaign, it was probably early October, or before the election. I'm at home. I lived with my parents at the time. I get this letter in the mail from the Kansas Department of Education, the Teachers Practices Commission.
Yeah.
And the El Dorado School Board is charging me with breach of contract because I had resigned from my contract.
Were there any politics involved there, do you think? Were they holding it against you?
I guarantee you there was a lot of politics involved.
Like Democratic with a capital D politics. That's kind of a red part of the state. Were they holding it against you that you ran as a Democrat or?
No, it was because I was a teacher.
Okay.
That's why they were.
So it was more inter-district. It was management versus.
Right.
Yeah. Which still goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the great thing was I was a member of KNEA. And so Margaret Peggy Gatewood became my attorney. She was the attorney for KNEA. And we went down, as the law prescribes, you have to have a hearing among a panel of 3 people, one that's picked by the teacher, one that's picked by the school board, and then those 2 pick the 3rd person in the panel. And so you have what's called a fact-finding hearing. And between my testimony and Dr. Franklin's testimony, it was like day and night. Because I remembered everything that was said, everything that he told me, and he didn't remember anything.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the attorney for the board and Dr. Franklin was a guy named O.J. Cannell. I even remember his name. And a guy named Fred Rausch, who was representing the Kansas Association of School Boards, who was also a member of the Topeka Board of Education. And Fred Rausch was decidedly anti-teacher. I mean, he showed his true colors, even on the local school board in Topeka. So what was interesting is we ended up appearing before the entire Teacher Practices Commission. Again, I testified, Dr. Franklin testified. My memory was, a lot better than his. But just prior to that hearing, the 3rd guy, the 3rd member who had been picked by the representative of the teacher and the school board, was going through school board minutes, and the meeting immediately after my resignation, in the school board meeting, there was a motion to repeal whatever the policy number was. And he went back to find out what that policy was, and it was a buyout, a late session buyout, that if you resigned like in August before the school year started, you paid $100 to buy out your contract, and you could legally, withdraw.
So they tried to repeal that.
They did repeal it.
And to prevent you from...
No, to cover up the fact that, to prevent me from paying...
From easily getting out of your contract. Right. And that showed some sort of intent.
Yeah, to, prevent me from just availing myself of the late buyout that was on the books.
Yeah.
And so, that guy told the Practices Commission about this whole thing. And so, for the first time since the Practices Commission had been created by law, they had over 30 previous cases that had always been decided against the teacher. Mm-hmm. But in this case, they found in favor of me, the teacher, in that situation. So, and so what I tell young teachers, people who are just starting in the profession, by all means, you should belong to NEA. Because had I not belonged to KNEA with the legal counsel of Peggy Gatewood, I would have been out thousands of dollars out of my pocket to pay for an attorney.
Sure.
But my dues to KNEA covered that expense.
Yeah, and the rest is history. You went on to have a long teaching career and went on to be an elected official that was probably one of the best friends teachers have had up here. So again, that's a great story. And KNEA has had you come out and talk to.
I've talked to
people before about that, right?
Yeah, I've talked to new teachers, Topeka teachers, and told them that story and explained to them why my example is shows how important it is that you should belong to KNEA.
So,
because you never know when somebody might try to sue you.
Yeah, or when the administration's not going to be easy to work with.
Right.
You can get it either way. Right.
That's right.
I want to talk about your mom and dad here in a second, but before I do that, why did you join KNEA? Everybody has a story. Some of them are interesting. Some of them are just...
To me, it just seemed the right thing to do. When I got that teaching job at El Dorado, I just felt like I should join the union. it just seemed to be natural.
Wasn't your grandpa a union steward over?
My dad's father was a union steward he was a United Auto Worker over in Kansas City, Missouri.
Yeah, okay.
And so that was influential too.
And he dropped dead
he was
at work
on the factory floor.
In his 40s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was 48, I think.
So would you say you kind of grew up in a very pro-union household?
Yeah.
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 Well, so that brings me to your parents. And, of course, I never met your dad. I've heard a lot of stories about him, seen a lot of pictures. But I knew your mom quite well, loved her. We've traveled together. I remember when you and I both were delegates to the 2004 Democratic Convention in Boston. And Debbie, your wife, and your mom, Georgina, you called her George or the General.
General George.
She didn't like to be called the General, but she didn't mind being called George. But she was one of a kind. How old was she when she passed?
She was 89.
89.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was so interesting about her was even in her late 80s, she was working at, was it Shora Villages?
Shorey Villa.
Shorey Village. Villas, okay.
Yeah, which is a HUD project that our church helped finance. My uncle, my mother-in-law's brother-in-law, or my mother's brother-in-law, helped coordinate that, and it went through the church. It was a senior housing complex of about 24 units. And she worked there, and she was older than most of the residents.
Yeah. That she was amazing.
She worked there up until she passed away.
Yeah, and she went quick. She fell and she broke her hip, and with people that age,
that was one of her greatest fears, is that she would fall someday. And I kept telling her to get a walker, which she wouldn't do. And she did break her hip and didn't live much longer after that.
Yeah, that was.
Now, my dad.
Well, so first of all, your dad, Harlan Hensley.
Yeah.
You've told this story so many times that you learned how to cuss during the Nixon administration.
My dad was a yellow dog Democrat. And by that, I mean he would vote for a yellow dog before he would vote for a Republican. And he grew up in Missouri. He was actually born in Iowa, but he grew up in Missouri. Hopkins, Missouri, and then they moved to Cameron, Missouri. That's where he went to high school. Cameron is up at the intersection of I-35 and 36 highway, which goes across Missouri to Illinois. But he ended up in Topeka on the GI Bill. He went to Washburn University, and that's when he met my mom. But growing up, when I was growing up, I've always told people that I learned profanity from my dad whenever Richard Nixon came on TV.
Yeah, so actually that would have been when he was running in 1960, more so than when he was president. Of course, I guess Nixon's first term was in 68.
Yeah.
So you still would have been around, living around home.
Yeah.
But your dad just...
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't stand Richard Nixon. And I said that aside from the day he got married and his 4 children were born, the happiest day of my dad's life was when he climbed those stairs to get in the helicopter to fly back to... Yeah, Richard Nixon, to fly back to California because he had
Your Belinda.
He had resigned the presidency.
Yeah. Yeah, oh boy. We'd probably take a Richard Nixon these days, wouldn't we?
I would think so.
I would think.
Yeah, I mean, when you look back on his accomplishments as president, they were pretty good.
Yeah, and he was a true statesman, despite the fact that he had some terrible flaws. But we could talk all day about that.
Paranoid.
Yeah, paranoid. And we know a lot about that over there at the State House too, don't we? There's a lot of people that are paranoid.
A lot of paranoid people at the State House. Yeah.
So,
but I got going back to my teaching career, I later got my master's in special education. And so I had the opportunity to go to work at a special purpose school for behavior disordered adolescents and children. It was called Capital City, located on the grounds of what was the Topeka State Hospital. It's still out there. And I worked at that job for 30 years and took a leave from that job to go to the legislature every year. I had some really good principals to work with. They gave me that opportunity.
But, you were working there when I first started working for you. And one of the first things that I learned about you, you had a bunch of your students up. You always had, about 16 students in?
Yeah, typically.
And you brought them up to the State House, and you bought them pizza. And not only did you show them around that day, I remember you in there pouring drinks, cutting pizza, serving these kids, and they really liked you. These were kids that came from backgrounds that a lot of times were challenging. I remember several times us getting a piece of mail to the office that would be from, it would always be like LCF, Lansing Correctional Facility, and they'd be former students of yours writing you, and you would quietly write a check and send it. I remember you bought a guy, I think it was a sweatsuit outfit that he needed, and I learned that about you, and it tied into your public service. It tied into the fact that you're a progressive. I would never call you a bleeding heart liberal, but you certainly, you would fit the mold, but we'd rather call you a lion or a bulldog than a bleeding heart liberal. But I think you fit both distinctions.
Well, I appreciate that.
And then I would go out. I remember going out, and I would head out there several times to get you to sign something during the day, because you taught in the off session, or when the legislature wasn't in session. So, but you were at the office every day after school. But sometimes we needed something from you, so I'd go out there, and I got to see what you were doing for a living, and how important it was to you, and it made it real obvious why you were such a advocate for public education. When you got elected the first time, 1976, that was right in the middle of Watergate, right?
Yeah, and what happened in that election is Gerald Ford had pardoned Richard Nixon for the Watergate scandal, and there was a tremendous backlash in Kansas against the Republicans because of that pardon. And consequently, the Democrats took control of the Kansas House of Representatives for the first time in 64 years. And so when I walked in the Capitol building in January of 1977, I was a member of the majority party. We had a 65-60 majority, and I've always said that the first vote that I cast was for John Carlin to be Speaker of the House. And, of course, then 2 years later, he became governor of Kansas. But that's pretty amazing to think about. But it was because of that 76 election fallout. And then I served.
That's not the only time, though, that you were in the majority. I
served again in the majority after the 1990 election. And in that election, Joan Finney was elected governor, first female governor in the history of our state. And we again got the majority. The majority was 63 to 62. We had a one-vote majority.
That was on a good day, though, right?
On a good day. I was majority whip, so it was pretty exciting.
What does whip do? A lot of people don't know.
Well, you count votes.
Yeah, you're the vote counters.
Yeah, and it was pretty exciting since we only had a one-vote majority. If we lost one Democrat, we lost the majority. So... and in retrospect, I mean, Democrats have had control of the Kansas House for 6 years out of the entire history of our state, and I was there four out of the six.
That's pretty amazing.
We've only had the majority in the Senate one time in 1913. And that was after...
That would have been Bull Moose, right?
That would have been in the 1912 election. William Howard Taft was the Republican candidate, and Teddy Roosevelt didn't like him.
Yeah.
So Roosevelt formed a third party and split the vote. And Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat running for president, actually carried Kansas.
Wow, yeah.
And that's very rare. The last time a Democrat carried Kansas in a presidential election was Lyndon Johnson
1964.
in 1964. Yeah.
And so it went from 1913 to 1964, a Democrat carrying Kansas.
Right. Well,
And
the
then
1912 election.
1912,
Yeah.
And, of course, no Democrats carried Kansas since 1964 in a presidential election.
I served, well, I was in the legislature for 44 years. I served with 10 governors. I served with 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. And in terms of years, I served 22 years with a Republican governor and exactly 22 years with a Democratic governor.
That's amazing. So there's
that really is amazing.
And there's still hope, right? I mean, there's still hope that Kansas elects good, moderate politicians.
Yeah.
I mean, because still one of those 10 that you served with is currently over there right now.
Right.
Laura Kelly.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, we thought we were going out to recruit her to run for the Senate in 2004, but we went over to the Jayhawk Tower. She was working at the Parks and Recs Association. She was the executive director, I think.
Right.
And we got a hot tip that she was interested in running for the 18th Senate District.
That's right.
Which we had just lost 4 years earlier.
Right.
Marge Petty.
Marge Petty lost it.
Yeah, it lost it to Dave Jackson. And so we really wanted that seat back, and we had a hot tip on somebody that was going to run. But by the time we got there, she had already been recruited by her neighbor. Who was that?
Kathleen Sebelius.
Kathleen Sebelius.
Yeah.
So we thought
who was the governor, a governor at the time.
So when I tell people that, well, I helped recruit Laura Kelly in her first race, I was there at the tail end.
Yeah.
She had already been recruited. You have a similar story about Kathleen Sebelius.
I do, yeah. Kathleen lived in a house district in the Potwin area. Like you say, she was Laura Kelly's next door neighbor, and the incumbent decided that she was going to run for Secretary of State, a woman named Judy Runnels. And so I more or less, it didn't take a whole lot of persuasion, but I more or less was able to talk Kathleen into running for that.
What year?
The
86?
56th district.
But what year? Is it 86?
Would have been 86.
86, yeah.
1986.
Yeah. Kathleen Sebelius, and of course, the rest is history for her, too.
I also recruited Joan Wagner.
You did?
Yeah, who became mayor of Topeka later, but we had an incumbent Democrat in the 55th district, which is the House district in and around Washburn University, and this guy was going to be disbarred. He was a lawyer.
Yeah.
And so I convinced him to withdraw, and we put Joan Wagner in at a precinct election level. And I told that story at a fundraiser here a while back, and I said she won by 1 vote. And she argued with me, saying, no, it was more than 1 vote. And I went out to the museum and pulled out the article that appeared in the paper that said she won by 1 vote.
I think I gave you the ride out there for us to go find those old microfilm articles.
We found that article.
That's true. I forgot about that.
Yeah. She won by 1 vote.
Joan, she still remains somewhat active.
Very active.
In local politics.
Yeah.
And I saw her husband Bill walking around the State House the other day. He was up there. It probably had something to do with Kansas history. Uh-huh. He's a big Kansas history guy, if you will. The
one thing I will say, though, now that we're in the election year 2026, the one thing that the Democrats have not done ever was to go back to back from a governor to a new governor.
Yeah.
We've never done that. We've always had a hiatus.
Well, I'm
For example, John Carlin was governor for 8 years, and then Mike Hayden became governor for 4 years. Until then, Joan Finney beat Mike Hayden.
Yep.
So we've never had the back-to-back. And this year, we need to do that.
We have to.
Yeah.
We need to. And what's interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up, because what's interesting about that is it reminds me of a dynamic that's going on over there right now. There's a lot of Democrats that are elected in either the House or the Senate over there that because they haven't been around very long, they have no idea what they're in for next year if we don't get a decent governor on the second floor, particularly a Democrat. They have no idea how good they have it. I remember when it was the same dynamic when Kathleen left. And of course, when Kathleen left, she went to go to the Obama administration, and Parkinson lived out her term. But there were Democrats that had served under a Democrat on the second floor that had the backstop of a veto and knew what it was like to at least be involved in the process. Whereas, and even at that, they could be critical of Kathleen, and they now are being and we've got allies, Democratic allies over there that are very critical of Laura. They have no idea what's going to happen next year if we don't get a Democrat in the second floor, or we don't get a decent Republican in the second floor. I think you compared the Brownback years for some of the Democrats like Moses in the desert. I mean, they tried to make us persona non grata in the Brownback years.
Fortunately, in the first 4 years of the Brownback era, in 2012, I'll take that back. In 2016, we were able to elect some moderates.
Yeah.
That helped.
Yeah.
To kind of equalize things, Republican moderates, and we were able to basically repeal his tax plan, which was disastrous for education.
It was, yeah.
Other, needs funded by the general fund.
Why? I mean, Brownback had everything going for him from an elected official's perspective. I mean, he had served in the Senate, he had served in the House, he had been the Secretary of Agriculture. He was pretty well liked on a one-on-one basis. When you sat across the table from Sam Brownback, he's easy to talk to. He's a nice guy. He's very folksy. Why did he become such an unpopular political figure in Kansas, and why is he still so unpopular?
Well, it was because he tried to do too much too fast, I think. And his tax, what he called a real live experiment, became very unpopular because it was giving tax breaks to, business people at the expense of average working people. And it just devastated our budget. He had to take money out of the highway fund to balance the budget. He cut education. I mean, in some cases, school districts went down to like a 4-day school week.
And we did away with the funding formula for how many years?
Oh,
it went to the block grants.
Went to the block grants for a couple of years, which was a really dumb idea.
Yeah.
This task force or whatever it's called that's meeting now about a new school finance formula, I think it's going to find out that what we've got on the books works really well.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think it's going to, there really needs to be, wholesale changes. The problem was, the formula stood the test of time. The problem was it was consistently underfunded by the legislature. Yeah. And that's why we ended up in court.
Yep.
That's why the Supreme Court, said that we had to fully fund schools. And for the last 7 years, that's exactly what Laura Kelly has done.
Right.
She has fully funded schools.
Absolutely. Well, she's been a good ally for KNEA. She's been a good ally for the teachers. Again, I get a little bit grumpy when I hear some of the Democratic legislators over there right now speak ill of her because, like I said earlier, they have no idea what they're in for next year if the elections don't go the way they want them to go.
I agree.
So let's talk about, we've talked about Brownback, talked about Republicans, and you are known as a Democratic fighter, a bulldog, pro-education, but also a champion of progressive issues. But you're also known as a coalition builder. I mean, all the time I worked for you, we were in the minority, obviously, and we couldn't get anything done without building coalitions with Republicans. And we built coalitions with conservative Republicans when we needed to, and we built coalitions with moderate Republicans as we needed to. How important is that?
I've always said that you got to stick with, whoever brought you to the dance. And in some cases, like you say, it would be the moderate Republicans, or in other cases, it might be the conservative Republicans. And you never pick one side over the other all the time. You work with whoever you can work with to build those coalitions. And it wasn't easy, but I think we were very successful at it on a number of different fronts, even in the area of school finance.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, one of our favorite sagas to talk about was redistricting, both in 2002 and 2012. In 2002, we teamed up there were 10 Democrats in the Senate, and we teamed up with 11 conservatives in the House. And
11 in the Senate.
I'm sorry, in the Senate. Yeah, 11 conservatives
21,
in the Senate.
which is the magic number to get anything done in the Senate.
Yeah, and we passed a map that basically saved all the Democrats.
Yeah.
And it was on Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
And Dave Kerr, the Senate president at the time, who looks like a moderate these days, right?
Right.
He always said that day and September 11th were the two worst days, of the early 2000s for him. Now, I don't know if he really said that. I didn't hear him say that, but somebody said that he said that.
We've heard that that's what he said.
So,
yeah, Valentine's Day, might call it the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Yeah.
But, no, we did. We formed a coalition with the conservatives in that case. 10 years later, we formed a coalition with the moderates. And I think we're pretty successful in both efforts to pass maps
that were fair. That's all we asked for.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing with all this redistricting talk that we have now, we didn't dare, nor did the Republicans dare, ever admitting that they were doing any political gerrymandering whatsoever.
That's right.
Nowadays, it's like you bet, we're gerrymandering.
There's
because
no holds barred nowadays.
Because we can.
Yeah.
It's changed a lot.
It
really has. And for redistricting purists like you and I, that's pretty sickening.
It really is.
At least, I always used to talk about we would always, the legislature would always pass a bunch of guidelines in redistricting every 10 years. And then the first thing we would do, we would break every one of them. But at least there was a sense of fairness at the end of the day.
Right.
We had to go through all the motions, but at the end of the day, everybody settled down, and most of the maps were pretty fair in the Senate side. And I think that even took place in 2022. I think the current Democratic caucus worked pretty closely with a Republican coalition to make sure that those, probably with Ty Masterson, to be honest with you, to make sure that those maps came out decently fair. Right.
And I think it's a good thing that at least there's some House Republicans who don't want to reopen congressional redistricting to try to go after Sharice Davids, who is the only Democrat in the Kansas congressional delegation.
Yep.
They've decided to stand their ground, and so what it sounds like the Speaker, Dan Hawkins, is not going to run a map.
Yeah, we haven't seen any evidence that they're trying to resurrect that idea whatsoever. Right. How long did you serve in the legislature?
I served 44 years.
And that makes you the longest-serving legislator in Kansas history.
That's right.
A Democrat in good old red Kansas is the longest.
Yeah.
I wonder who's come closest. You've had.
I broke the record at 34.
Who was it?
Or excuse me, I broke the record at 35. Ross Doyen.
That's right.
Served for 34 years. He was a Republican from up by Concordia. He served 10 years in the House, and he served 24 in the Senate. This year, there are 2 Democrats that will have reached that number, 34. David Haley and Barbara Ballard.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they both will have served 34 this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
So David is from Kansas City, Kansas.
And Barbara's from Lawrence.
Barbara's from Lawrence. I can only think of 3 people that are up there now that would have served in kind of those glory days of your career. David Haley, Barbara, and then Henry Helgerson.
Well, and Tom Sawyer.
Oh, Tom, yeah. Tom's still there, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's several of them that you would have served with in your last term that are still there, but those are kind of the originals, if you will, at least in my career.
Yeah, Sawyer and I were in the majority in 91 and 92.
So how long's Tom?
That's a good question. Tom's probably been there for, I'd say, 28 years maybe.
But he left in 98 to run for governor against Bill Graves.
Right.
And then he was
came
out
back.
probably 6 years or so.
Yeah, I think 6 years. Then he came back.
Tom's doing a good job over there, particularly for the House Democrats on tax policy. He really knows what he's talking about. Well, you and I, we could sit here and talk all day. Given the way things have changed, particularly in the last 10 years, and the environment being in the way it is for teachers in the classroom and then for teachers in the legislature, what's some good advice you can give our members in terms of what do we need to do to be successful in that building over there?
Well, you need to keep an open mind. You need to listen to those that whose opinions you agree with and those whose opinion you don't agree with, and try to find common ground. That's what I always tried to do when it was possible.
When it was possible, yeah.
Otherwise, if, they were going to try to roll us over, then they'd have a fight on their hands.
Right. Yeah, we wouldn't have any problem, quote, tearing the place down. But that wasn't the first move. It was never hell no.
No.
It was how can we be part of the process? Yeah. How can we be part of the solution? And then it wasn't until we were purposely and unfairly frozen out that we decided to fight. And I think that sequence has changed a lot in recent days or in recent years. I think everybody, particularly the more passionate people on both sides of the aisle, their first move is just to be hell no and fight. And they think that's the only way of...
Right.
And I think part of that has to do with the fact that social media is so prolific and everybody's wanting to go viral. And that causes for some very bad antics in the legislative process.
One of the stories that I always tell that I think really shows how important it is to try to find a compromise was when a guy named Dick Bond was president of the Senate. He was a moderate Republican from Johnson County. And he and I came into leadership together. I became the minority leader the same year that he became president of the Senate. And the governor was a guy named Bill Graves, who Bond and Graves both wanted a highway bill.
Yeah.
And wanted us to come to the office. When I say us, I'm talking about Janice Lee, who is our ranking Democrat on tax, great legislator from western Kansas. Marge Petty, who we've mentioned previously, who is our ranking Democrat on Ways and Means, the Budget Committee. So we went into Bond's office, and before we went in there, I told Marge and Janice, I said, no, we're going to walk out of this meeting. And they said, we are?
Yeah, as in storm out.
Yeah, I said, no, we're going to walk out. And you need to go with me, because if you don't, I'll look like a fool walking out by myself. And I said, and you'll know when it's time to walk out. So they said, well, this will be interesting. So we walked in there, and Bond had a one-page piece of paper that showed the highway plan that they wanted to pass. And he had research staff go over the contents of the paper, and he said, so what do you think? And I said, well, I've got a question. And he said, well, what's that? And I said, when's the school finance conference committee going to meet? Well, what's that got to do with this? I said, well, you want our votes for highways.
Yeah.
And we'd like to have your votes for a school finance plan. He said, well, we can't do that. We don't put those things together. I said, Dick, are you kidding me? We do that kind of thing all the time.
Yeah,
we
of course.
lump things
That's a
together.
sausage making.
And I said, if you can't do it, I guess this meeting's over. So we got up and we walked out.
Yeah. But you were friends with Dick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot of animosity.
Yeah,
it was just,
but it was time. Yeah,
I was making my
setting
point.
some boundaries.
Yeah. So I walked over, after that meeting, I walked over to the House. They were in session. My friend Bill Reardon, who was the ranking Democrat on the Education Committee in the House, a teacher at the time, I was telling him this story. And about that time, a staff member of the Speaker's office walked over to Reardon and he said, hey, Bill, the school finance committee is going to meet. And I said, or he looked at me and he said, well, you did it. You got it done. I said, I don't know if I got it done. Let's just see what happens. So we go to the meeting, and typical of a first-time conference committee meeting, the staff just went over the differences between the House and the Senate on school finance. So Bond calls us back over again, and he says, well, the school finance committee met. And I said, well, yeah, I'm on the committee. We met, but we didn't do anything. He said, well, what is it that you want? I said, I'll tell you what I want. I want $50 on the base for 2 years in a row. He said, there's no way in hell we can do that. And I said, well, Dick, if we can pass a transportation plan and fund it for 10 years in a row, surely we could pass a school finance plan and fund it for 2 years in a row. Well, we got it.
Yeah, it's all about priorities.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing that the majority party still does, that they can't afford the things that we want, but they don't hesitate on the things that they want. Of course, we all wanted a highway plan.
Right.
I mean, that's always been a bipartisan push.
Sure.
But, yeah.
But my timing was perfect.
Yeah.
Because they wanted our votes, and they needed our votes because the conservatives in their caucus weren't going to vote for the gas tax increase or any of the funding mechanisms to fund a transportation plan.
Yeah. Yep.
And so we got Graves and Bond and eventually Dave Kerr, who was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, to agree to a 2-year, $50 on the base school finance plan.
Wasn't Dave Kerr in one of the follow-up meetings where Dick Bond broke the news to him that you guys were going to do the $50, and he about walked out of that meeting?
I broke the news. I broke the news.
What did he do? He looked over.
He said, there's one more thing. Kerr said, is this it? And Bond said, no, there's one more thing. He said, Anthony, would you explain to him what it is? And so I broke the news to him. Yeah.
I run into Dave about once every session. It's good to see him. Outside of the way we used to see him as just the hardcore leader of the Republicans that you could not stand to work with Democrats. He's now pretty fun to talk to.
Yeah.
Yeah, he really is.
He's away from the process.
Yeah, and that's so typical of people up here that they're pretty normal until they get into that building over there, and it can change people.
It really can.
It does. It changes people. And it's changed a lot since you started. Obviously, it's changed a lot since I started. The one thing I am seeing the last few years, though, at least from my perspective, even though the politics itself gets harder and gets, in my opinion, more radical, there's a lot of people over there that are treating each other a lot better. on a personal basis. There were several years during the Brownback years, and I'm not blaming it on Sam Brownback, but during the Brownback years, you'd get on the elevator with somebody of the opposite party, and you may not even speak. There was some bitter feelings, and I know there still are over there, but I noticed that both the Democrats and the Republicans are making a better effort at building relationships with each other. I don't think it's anything like it would have been when you started, when you would serve with people that you could turn everything off at 5 o'clock and go out and dine together and stuff like that. But who are some of the more colorful characters?
Well, I mean, you can only begin with Wyandotte County.
Yeah.
In terms of colorful characters.
Herman Dillon.
Herman Dillon is a guy that I think about a lot. Great thing about Herman was when we were in the majority, he and I came in together in 77, and then that's when we were in the majority, and then we were in the majority again in 91 and 92, and Herman became the chairman of the Transportation Committee. And what's significant about that is Herman was a Teamster truck driver.
Yeah.
And there's nobody that understands highways better than a Teamster truck driver, which I always thought was interesting, that we had somebody that was actually literally on the road to chair the Transportation Committee, and he was widely respected on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
Had an 8th grade education.
Yeah.
Later in life, went back and got his GED.
There's 2 bridges named after him.
There's 2 bridges, right?
Yeah.
I won't explain why, but and then another guy that comes to mind is not from Wyandotte, but from Wichita, Darrell Webb. Darrell Webb was chairman of the Building Construction Committee. He was a pipe fitter. And, when you build a building, you got to have a pipe fitter expertise.
Absolutely.
So when the Republicans had the majority, they had an engineer as chairman of the Building Construction Committee. It takes an engineer and it takes a pipe fitter to build a building. So we had...
I remember a story of a guy that you guys used to threaten to send down to the well if you didn't get your way.
John Sutter.
Did he have like a neck brace or something?
Well, he'd got whiplash. He got hit from behind, and he had his neck. I don't know if he had surgery or not, but he still had his neck brace under his desk, and so when we wanted to, threaten to stall time.
Kind of filibuster type.
We could have John put his neck brace on and go down and talk about his whiplash injury, which was good for a good 30 minutes.
Yeah. That's pretty short in comparison of the famous or infamous, depending on which side you're on, the gaming debate. How long was that? 2007, debated gaming. We about out of our battery over there?
Not yet, but you guys are over an hour. So.
Okay, well, we're going to have to break this up in different sections. Go ahead, Anthony.
One more fun podcast isn't going to deter people.
The story of 07 was we were short 2 votes to pass gaming. Kathleen was governor, and she was pushing gaming, trying to get legalized gaming in Kansas where we could have casinos. And we had, for all practical purposes, we had a filibuster that lasted 11 hours.
Yeah.
Came down to a guy from Johnson County named David Wysong. Was reading the rules of blackjack.
That's right.
In the course of the filibuster, and
of course the majority leader was Derek Schmidt, now congressman.
Yeah,
and
Congressman
he was voting with us on that.
He was. In fact, the moderate Republican leadership was with us on that deal. But so we got one of the Republicans flipped, went from no to yes.
Terry Bruce
from Hutchinson, and then But I called the governor and I said, Kathleen, I don't think we're going to make it. We've got Bruce. That gives us 20. We needed 21. And she says, well, why don't you talk to Greta again? Greta Goodwin, who is from Winfield, had always opposed gaming. But I had told her a couple years earlier that there may come a time when I'd have to ask her for a vote. I said, I'll leave you alone, but if we come down to it and we need you to be our 21st vote, I'm going to have to ask you to do that. And this was that time. Yep. And so she said, well, why don't you talk to Greta one more time? So Greta came out of the chamber. I didn't want people to see me talking to her on the Senate floor.
We went back to my office.
We went back into your office, and Greta was sitting there, and I said, we've got Terry Bruce has switched, so now we've got 20. And I said, this is the time, Greta, if you can vote for us, with us. So you'd be the 21st vote. She said, well, I don't understand this. She said, there's 30 people over in that caucus on the other side. They can't get one more vote. Yeah. No, they can't. Because we were on a motion to concur.
Yeah.
Earlier in the day, it was a House bill.
It was a phony motion.
Yeah, well, it was a motion to...
It was an insincere motion.
Well, to kill the bill. Yeah. Because if the motion to concur fails and the bill is not in a conference committee, then the bill's dead.
Yeah.
And Jim Barnett was the one who made the motion earlier in the day.
Yeah, and you apparently threatened him, which you didn't.
Well, he claimed I threatened him, but I just told him I'll never forget this.
Well, you asked him a favor. You said, could you hold off on making that motion until we can get the Speaker of the House to actually appoint the conference committee?
Yeah.
And he said, no, not going to do it.
Not going to do it.
You looked him right in the eye and said, okay, I will never forget this.
Yeah, that's all I said.
So he led with that. With
I was threatening him.
He was the victim in that. That situation.
So, as it turned out, Greta agreed to switch to yes. And so we went to the roll call.
And I'll never forget the look on Pete Brungart's face when you sent me to talk to Pete, and you went to talk to Derek Schmidt. And I said, hey, we've got Greta. I'll never forget the look on his face. And he was out standing at the rail,
right?
Because the filibuster had gotten so long and uncomfortable, and he headed back in there quick.
Yeah, well, and as it turned out, I went back and talked to Derek. He was back in his office, and I said, I got Greta. I said, but to make sure.
That's right, yeah.
I said, let's have Terry and Greta come back here into your office so that they can both look at each other in the eye.
I forgot about that.
And say, we're yes folks.
We're with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how it came down.
And again, because we didn't want anybody seeing you talking to her, and we didn't want people to get antsy, we did all this kind of in secret. And David Wysong, as you mentioned before, who was reading the rules of blackjack and baccarat and all that stuff, he didn't have any idea that was going on. So when we finally had it all put together, you sent Derek Schmidt out, and Derek just walked up, all 6'8" of him, walked up to Wysong and just kind of gave him one of these time to cut it off. And Wysong looked at him and said, "You serious?"
Yeah.
And then the motion, it went. I mean,
well, we voted on the motion to concur.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they put a call of the Senate on, and we stayed there for a while.
And then there was a hell of a party that night.
21-19. Yeah.
And Kathleen even showed up to that party that night.
She did.
Speaking of Kathleen, how did you know when she was pissed at, or when she was mad at you?
Well, if she called me, and even now, when I've got her in my phone as KGS, Kathleen Gilligan Sebelius, I wouldn't answer the phone when she called, but she'd leave a message, and she'd say, "Anthony, this is Kathleen. Could you give me a call?" And if she put it that way, I knew everything was okay. But if the message was, "Anthony, this is Kathleen Sebelius," I knew I was in trouble for something. Yeah. I didn't know what for sure, but I knew I was in trouble. So.
She was a good governor. I run into her quite a bit in Lawrence, and she lives over there now. And I still call her governor, or at least up until about a month ago. or 2 months ago, I still call her governor. And finally she said, Tim, after all these years, would you please just call me Kathleen? So I said, all right, I will, because I could never just call her Kathleen. I had so much respect for her.
I saw her the night of the State of the State, most recent.
Was she back was she at the State House?
Uh-huh. She told me she had attended Laura's first State of the State, and she came back for her last State of the State. So,
well, like I said earlier, we could do this forever, and I wish we could do a what would you call it? The unedited version of all the really good stories, yeah. But that's probably not appropriate, But we've had some good time.
You're on the Outside of Work podcast.
There you go. Yeah, But Anthony, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. This has been so much fun. Let's do it again. I love you, man. You have been a great mentor. You've taught me so much. You've had great patience. You're a special education teacher, so you were able to maneuver my passion for politics and my interest and keep me interested, let me grow the way I needed to grow. And you were a big supporter of me when I wanted to have this job. So it makes a lot of sense for us to sit here and talk about this, or talk about our time together.
Well, you were a good chief of staff and a really good map maker.
Yeah, I liked making maps. I really did. Well, how should we? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's talk about. Let's not talk about the governor's race. Let's talk about just as we leave. Give us some predictions for election night this year.
I think that the House Democrats in Kansas have a good chance of picking up seats. I think they're doing a really good recruiting job.
And raising money, too.
And raising money, from what I understand. It's always tough. What people don't understand, even people within the process don't understand it, it's not the Democratic Party that goes out and recruits candidates. It's the leader's office that goes out and recruits candidates. Yeah. And I've had that experience multiple times. As I was Senate leader for 24 years.
Yeah.
Which is a record I don't think will ever be broken.
Yeah,
that's one that'll stand for all the ages. But at the national level, I think the House Democrats have a chance of getting the majority back.
Yeah.
Which would be Donald Trump's worst nightmare.
Right. Yeah.
They're going to do everything they can to try to prevent that. When I say that the Republicans. And there's an outside shot that the Senate will go Democratic. And I still believe, well, in Kansas, I think Chris Mann stands a good chance of getting elected Attorney General.
Yeah.
I think people are, much like with Donald Trump, they're tired of Chris Kobach and his shenanigans. And I also believe that we have a chance of electing a Democratic governor if, after we go through this primary, that we can unite and realize that the most important thing is to elect a Democrat.
Yeah. And the reason that, obviously KNEA, everybody thinks we're a Democrat organization, and the truth is that our members are we've probably got more registered Republicans as members.
Sure.
But the reason we appear to be Democrat is because we support more Democrats in the elections, because they support our agenda far better at the State House on education issues.
Right.
But with that being said, there's a lot of room for us to bring Republicans into our education lane. Interestingly enough, some of the even more partisan Republicans are wanting to listen to us and are wanting to hear from teachers. So we've been able to turn that around a little bit. But again, who's on the second floor next year is going to be very, very critically important to the future of education in Kansas.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, Anthony, again, thank you. Let's do this again.
We can do it after the election.
There you go. Yeah, I can talk about it, or even during the election. I thought about an idea of just having a few election updates
Sure.
as we go through. Maybe we can get on there and gossip. Maybe we can bring other people on to talk to. We can bring some Republicans on. The first guest I had was the Speaker Pro Temp, Blake Carpenter.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he has a proposal that he really worked hard to get us to listen, and I said, well, why don't you come on this new podcast we have? So we definitely we want to have people in both parties come on the podcast and talk about either what's going on over there, or as like what you and I just did, talk about the history and how important the coalitions that you and I have seen built over there, and you have been a part of building them, how important those were to public education too. The funding and different things like that. So,
well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. All right. Well, I need to make sure that everybody knows that to tune in next week. I don't know how this podcast is going to be. We may have to break it up in two or three little sections, but that'll be great because I think it'll get people to come back and listen. Because this has been a really fun conversation. I think a lot of our members will find it interesting. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you soon, or we'll talk to you soon.